We're seeing, certainly, a lot of the countries I'm visiting, growing civic activism and citizen activism. And a few months ago, was in Saudi Arabia, and that's one of the last countries in the world you'd imagine to find civic activism. And yet I was amazed at some of the civic leaders I met there, who are doing some truly remarkable things on women's economic empowerment and youth development projects. And I'm from Zimbabwe, and the civic activism in my country just in recent months with the election has been amazing. So I think those sort of four factors of increasingly complex problems, governance gaps and failures, market failures, and growing civic activism and interconnectivity through the internet and social networking are creating an opportunity for these new partnerships to emerge. So that's sort of one key framing point that I think we are seeing an increase in these partnerships, and yet we still know everyone's doing it by the seat of the pants, and particularly when one's in sort of crisis or post-crisis situations. And I think we're sort of trying to catch up in terms of understanding what works, what doesn't, and whether this really is a new way of organising for the long-term future and a new way of governance for the future or not. So I think we're absolutely at the heart of a movement that's happening, as I say, I certainly find around the world where I'm visiting. I think the second sort of key point I want to make is that partnerships, having said that, partnerships are not a panacea, they're not the answer to everything, and they've got some really major challenges associated with them, and I think we're going to be exploring some of those in particularly the sessions this afternoon and probably the second session this morning. So I think we've got to be realistic, and that they're very, very challenging to make work, as I partly need to say to this group, but I think again we need to sort of address up front what some of the key challenges are, and I'm amazed as I sort of study partnerships around the world, how common a lot of the challenges are, even between different levels of partnership, between global and local partnerships. I think there are a number of very common challenges which we have to address, but I think we've got to be realistic that they are difficult. And then the third and final point I'll make is that although they're not a panacea, I think they can be an incredibly effective strategy and tool for solving complex challenges. But we have to approach them as that. They're not an end in themselves, they're a means to an end, and a tool to solve challenges. And there are three different types of partnership that I think are particularly interesting, and we do have these slides outside, so you don't have to take copious notes here of a busy slide, but to me the three, there's obviously numerous ways you can categorize partnership and everything, and I don't want to get too theoretical, but I think there's three types of partnership that I think are particularly interesting, and certainly I see really playing out here in New Orleans. And the first is what I call operational partnerships, where groups are mobilizing different types of resources to either improve the efficiency or the effectiveness or the equity of service delivery, whether it's health delivery or education delivery or community recovery or housing delivery, but basically sort of operationally focused to try and improve project management and activities on the ground. And obviously a lot of the partnerships we see here are in that category. And within that, I think you've got a range of sort of options for managing them, from quite transactional, where you'll have a company giving more than philanthropy, but a company giving resources, and then a non-profit or a community organisation doing something in return for that, to initiatives where you've actually got the partners co-creating together really innovative solutions, and the partnerships govern together and co-create together. And Henry mentioned our Shell partnership, where there hasn't been sort of dictation on what we should do, but a real sense of developing it together and co-creating. And again, I think a lot of the partnerships here are co-creating together as you go along, which I think are much more challenging in some ways, but have much more potential for impact than just a transactional arrangement. So I think operational partnerships are one key type. I think the second key type are sort of partnerships very specifically aimed to build local capacity, local institutions, local assets. And you're building human capital, building social capital, making institutions work better. So they're not just project-based, but actually trying to make institutions and sort of human capacity work more effectively. And then thirdly, and I think also very interestingly, are partnerships that actually try and change the system. And it can be sort of a local government system, or it can be even a national or global system. And things like advocacy and campaigning partnerships, or some of the things that I'm sure Arkham will mention, is community accountability mechanisms, where communities are trying to hold local governments more accountable, and actually developing new mechanisms to make the system work better, not just to do projects. And I think particularly where there are systems challenges, these are probably the most challenging partnerships at all, but if we can't make the system work better, we're going to keep on having the challenges that we need to do all the projects for. So I think those are sort of like three broad types of partnerships that we'll be hearing about today. And a key point in partnership is, and I don't want to go into this definition in too much detail, but yeah, I think there is a tendency to think, philanthropic check is partnership, and I think we need to be more rigorous, and that partnership is more than that. And I think to me there are two key elements. One is this mutual benefit. Are the different partners getting mutual benefit? And I'm sure we'll explore that today. But also this concept of sharing risks, responsibilities, sort of resources and competencies, and that everyone's got a stake in the game, as it were. I think if it's a real partnership. But again, when we think of resources and competencies, I think there's a challenge to think of money as the main resource, and there's no doubt that it is the main resource. But at the risk of being incredibly simplistic, I have what I call the 7 Ps of the sort of resources that different parties can bring to the table. Because I think so often there's the feeling if you've got the money, you're the one who's powerful and you'll drive the partnership. And yet the amount of community resources that can be brought to the table are absolutely phenomenal. And I, again, won't go through this in detail now because we'll be discussing it during the day. But in addition to different types of funds, public, private, and philanthropic, the people resource is obviously phenomenal, and I think that's been the magical story and the inspiring story of so much of what's happened here. And a whole range from student volunteers right up to experts and advisors. Products and different services and technology sharing, which either companies or other partners can share with communities. Actually using sort of physical property and premises to help meetings happen and hosting community offices and things like that. The whole thing of sort of awareness raising, promotion, marketing, brands, outreach networks, those in themselves are resources that can be used to solve the public challenges we face. Power and influence, how are communities working with either corporate partners or other partners that are well networked and have influence and can use that power and influence to advocate for the community. And I think that's one of the opportunities that could be explored a lot more, how we can get corporate voices and other more powerful voices to advocate more for community level leadership and partnership. And then participatory problem solving approaches is a resource in itself, I think, and I'm sure we'll explore that a bit more in the panel, that actually using these new approaches that are more participatory to get citizens involved is another resource that could be mobilized. So we'll be exploring these as we go through the day, but I think I just wanted to sort of give those comments to frame both our panel and the rest of the day that I'm certainly convinced, although as I say, we don't have rigorous academic evidence yet, that certainly anecdotally, partnerships are becoming a new way of leadership, a new way of problem solving, and I think the very difficult and challenging but inspiring learning laboratory that everyone's going through here has enormous lessons, both to learn from and share with the rest of the world. Secondly, they are difficult, and we'll be dealing and looking at that a lot during the day. But then thirdly, that I think they can be a really important strategy for moving forward. And really, what I hope we'll sort of have and be able to take away at the end of the day is, what are some of the new types of partnership that are emerging, and particularly what are the institutional innovations that are a way forward for the future. And then linked to that, how can we build more effective partnerships? And I think very important question there, what are the individual leadership skills that we need to build more effective partnerships?